go ahead and start. So, Rachelle, would you like to introduce yourself first?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Would you like to introduce yourself first so everyone knows who you
Oh,
are?
why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I'll go first. All right. So, hi, my name is James Ponti. I am an author. I write middle grade fiction. I mostly write mystery and spy fiction. So, I have one series I did is a traditional mystery series, Frame. And there's 3 books in the Frame series: Frame, Vanish, and Trap. And the current series that I am writing is City Spies. And the first one came out last year, and I was supposed to come to the festival, and then, of course, it didn't happen. And then the new one just came out a couple months ago, and that's what I am doing now. I am speaking to you from my house in Orlando, Florida, where I write the books. And it's really an honor to be here and part of such a great festival. And we are talking about mysteries and whatnot. And I'm here with the wonderful Rachelle Delaney from Vancouver. So it's really early for her. So everyone be all the more amazed that she's up. Rachelle, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself and your books?
Thank you. All right. So my name's Rochelle, and really, really happy to be here in this virtual space with you. So yeah, like James said, I'm in Vancouver in Canada, where it is just after 8 o'clock in the morning. And I have written and published 8 middle grade novels now, many of which are mysteries, many of which turn out to be mysteries, even when I don't mean for them to be mysteries. My latest novel, which actually just came out on Wednesday, so it's a birthday week, is Alice Fleck's Recipes for Disaster. So I'm sure I'll talk a little bit about this book as we go along. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here with you all. Thanks for having me.
So I'm curious, have you always been drawn to mysteries as a reader, as a viewer, or is it just something that when you started writing, you felt like that was a natural thing for you to write?
Yeah, good question. I feel like it's more of a natural thing for me to write. Like I said, like sometimes I will come up with a concept for a story and start writing it, and then halfway through I'll be like, oh, this is a mystery again, which is interesting. I do love reading and watching mysteries as well. But yeah, I think it's a perfect for that middle grade genre as well. How about you?
I am addicted to watching. So we already were into watching, my wife and I, and then during COVID, we binged every American, virtually every British. We've watched like Danish, Icelandic, or we watch mysteries from everywhere. And it's funny. It's funny how that it works everywhere, and also it's funny that no matter what language, the one word that's always the same is okay. Okay means the same thing in every language. We've learned that. But no, I love it, and I love writing history, especially for middle grade, because I think that when I grew up before computers and video games were much more than little dots, mystery books were like the most interactive thing there was, because the idea of a mystery is not just that you're going to read it, but that you're going to participate and you're going to get the clues. And I know, when I'm writing, I spend a lot of time trying to be fair with clues. Like my goal is to lay out enough clues for you to solve it, but also I'm hoping that you don't. I want, someone, before we got on, someone was saying they just read one of your books, they couldn't solve it until the end, right? And that's the goal. Like what I feel like when I'm writing a mystery is I want you not only do I not want you to solve it, but when you hear the solution, I want you to think, of course, how did I miss that? There's nothing more frustrating than watching a mystery or reading a mystery and at the end finding out, well, what you didn't know was that in another room that we never told you about, this was going on, or and it's like, well, that's cheating. And now I feel like, so I love the interactive part of it, and I love the puzzle of it. Were there any mystery books or things that really hooked you when you were a young reader?
I was just thinking about this morning, trying to remember the ones that really did. I was thinking about From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler. Did you read that one?
It's my all-time favorite book.
Of course.
It's my all-time favorite book.
It's wonderful.
It's amazing. And
yeah.
This shaped my writing more than virtually anything.
Yeah.
So
Did you have any other favorites?
I think the art mystery of this directly relates to the art mystery, and this takes place at the National Gallery of Art, where this took place in the museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Another one that's a really big one for me, and I have a paperback of one here, are the Encyclopedia Brown mysteries. And what I loved about those is those were truly interactive. The way that Encyclopedia Brown was written, you would read like, first of all, I struggled as a reader. I was a very slow reader. So they were only like 8 pages long, but the answers were in the back of the book. So like you would read it and then you would have to figure it out, and then you turn to the back to find the solution. And I love that. And the reason I have this is it's a signed copy. A librarian gave it to me because she knew I was a fan, and so she got that for me when I went to her school. Right?
Amazing.
But yeah, so I do like that. Those were, and again, I guess that's why I think it was interactive, because those were so much like, okay, now that you thought about it, who is it? Now go to the back of the book and see it. And it was actually part of a thing. Where was it? I guess I don't have a copy here. There was 20 of us. The Mystery Writers of America published a book last year where we wrote one chapter mysteries, so about 5,000 words, and the solutions were on the back of the book. And it was very exciting for me. I felt like I was in an Encyclopedia Brown novel.
Oh, that's so interesting. Wow. Is that available? That was
the here, it's this. Super Puzzle-tastic Mysteries, and it was among the authors on there, Stuart Gibbs, a good friend of mine, Chris Grabenstein, Flora Bradley, Tyler White.
Cool.
It's great. So a lot of great mysteries in there. And Chris was the one who got us all together for this. Chris Grabenstein, and his goal was that it would be something that a teacher could read aloud in one sitting, and the class could try to figure out who did it. And so that's kind of the guiding principle.
So can I ask you a question? Actually, do we have other questions that we're supposed to be answering right now, or can I just?
I think we're supposed to talk for a little bit, what questions back up, and then we can answer them.
Okay, cool.
What question do you have?
So I am curious, how much plotting goes into your mysteries? And I would love to know. So I have to answer this first. Whereas I figured this question might come up, and I was hoping you would answer first, so I could find out how to really do it. So for those that aren't familiar with the term, that they're called plotters and pantsers, right? So plotters are the ones who have a detailed outline, and pantsers are the ones who write with the seat of their pants. And I call myself a plotster. So I plot the beginning and not the rest, usually. So the setup, I will write notes and I'll do diagrams. I have these little boards, and I write notes on the board, and they're just scattered all around my office. So, okay, yes, don't forget that, don't forget this. And eventually I moved to index cards, and the index cards just lay out the whole plot, and I laid them on the floor, and then at the end it becomes this. Oh, wow.
So then I become a plotter, but that's after I've written the draft. So it's an ongoing thing. For me, though, the one part, I talk all over the place, and I apologize for that.
Okay.
The idea of frames, which is my most traditional mystery series. There's mysteries in all of it. This is the idea of frames is 12-year-old Florian Bates and his best friend Margaret are basically consulting detectives for the FBI at the end of the novel. And it's kind of like Sherlock Holmes. And they use a technique called TOAST. And TOAST stands for the theory of all small things. And the idea is that Florian has developed this because his family moves all the time. And he uses the theory to understand people in a new environment. And it's looking for little details, and you add them all up, and then that tells you the bigger truth. So each book starts with the reveal of when Florian figures it out. So in the first book, it starts with, and he's with this, he's been kidnapped, but it's like a humorous kidnapping, but he's with someone from the Romanian mafia is basically sitting across from him, and he sees this tattoo, and a tattoo on the arm is the clue that solves everything. And he goes, you have to let me go because the FBI is on their way to get you, and I don't have much time to tell you why your tattoo changes everything. And that's the end of the chapter. So we don't know why it's the clue, but we know that it is the clue. And then you go for 240 pages until you get back to that moment again. So for that, I felt it was always super important that the payoff had to be worth the 240-page wait. So the very first thing I came up with on all those mysteries was the big aha moment clue. So I didn't plot everything, but I had that moment out here and knew I had to get to it. And then I would plot the beginning, and then I would just go. I would write, and I'd write with almost like a trip, like I'm driving from Orlando, where I live, to Miami, and I may take detours, but I know I always have to be heading towards Miami, and I know that's the destination. Now, what about you? What about you with your mysteries? How do you put them together?
That's really interesting. Yeah, thank you also for showing us the index cards. I love that. Yeah, I am also a plotzer.
Okay.
I would not be able to be a pantser. It's just not in my nature. I have to outline everything. So I spend a lot of time plotting and outlining before I ever start writing. Usually sometimes it's actually years before I ever start writing. It's not necessarily all well lined out, but I do like staying in that planning phase a lot. So in terms of mysteries, I have an idea of where it's going to end. Generally, I have an idea of what the crime is. Hopefully I have an idea of who actually did it. Sometimes I don't. And those are a little bit more difficult. I'll have to work through it in that first draft. But yeah, I usually start out with like a couple kind of overarching outlines. So I have my plot outlines, I have my character outlines, that kind of thing. And then as I start writing, I do more and more detailed outlines. This is how fixated on outlines I am. I'll do an outline for every single chapter before I start writing it, which to me is, I think of it sometimes as like a security blanket.
That makes total sense. And I think it's probably the way you're supposed to do it. So if any of you are aspiring at it, I think you should listen to her advice, because I'm jealous that I don't do that. But when I've tried, it just doesn't work out.
It doesn't work?
Like I will do like these incredibly detailed first chapter outline. And then by the fourth one, it's just like, then you get into trouble. It's like, that can't be the outline, And are any of your books series, or are they all standalone?
Most of them are standalone. My very first novels that I published, there was a 3-book series. It was about pirate children. So that was the only series. Actually, no, I lied. There is a 2-part series, I guess, a book and a sequel. So the first one was called The Metro Dogs of Moscow. This was published back in, I want to say 2013. And the sequel was The Circus Dogs of Prague. The dogs were traveling. So this is actually a mystery as well. Yeah, just briefly, because I love telling this story. It is loosely based on this real life story of these stray dogs in Moscow who learn to take the subway to get around the city. Not sure if you heard of this, but these dogs have taught themselves to travel around by themselves in search of food. And there's all these biologists in Moscow who study these dogs. It's really fascinating. So this is actually told from the perspective of a dog. His name is JR. He's a Jack Russell Terrier. Okay. And he ends up in Moscow, and he meets these stray dogs and finds out that there are stray dogs going missing all over the city, and nobody knows where they're ending up. So it's kind of like he has to join forces with some other dogs to find these missing strays. So that was pretty fun. I got to go to Moscow to do some research as well.
Oh, did you really?
I did.
So yeah. Research, is that a big part of it for you?
It is huge. I love the research. And, it's kind of like, it's probably because I like staying in that planning phase. Again, it's less daunting than the actual writing, but yeah, I love doing the research. How about you?
Yeah, I love research. I'd love to know some of. So you went to Moscow. So how deep do you get into it? I mean, do you always go to the places if you can? Did you go to Prague?
I've gone to Prague, yeah, but not. I went quite a long time before I actually wrote The Circus Dogs of Prague. So I had to rely on my memories. I love to be able to go to the places that I write about, but it's not always possible. I did write another book that was about a circus school in Montreal. And I did travel to Montreal several times to do research there, and also took some circus classes to really get the feel of it.
I love research, and I think it's essential. Like I have a series where I have 5 kids who are spies for MI6.
Right. Yeah.
I have 2 kids who are, detectives for the FBI. So obviously, the fact-based reality of these books is off to a bad start. And the way I counter that is by trying to make everything else as true and realistic as possible. And so for the Frame series, I would constantly go up to Washington, and I would walk through all the places where they went, and I would go. I could never get the National Gallery of Art to show me behind the scenes, because I think they knew I was writing about a painting being stolen. And so I would do things like I would go with my son, and I would tell him, "Oh, see, now I get your picture." But really, I would take a picture of how the painting was secured to the wall. Like, I would look this way, but I would take that way. And but by the second book, that book did pretty well and got nominated for the Edgar Award. And people were like, "Oh, the second book was set in the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts." So they took me behind the scenes there, and that was great. And I got in trouble there because I took pictures in President Obama's private viewing box, and someone was watching me on closed circuit TV taking it, and so they came and they accosted me in the hallway of like, you can't do that, and I'm sorry, no one said. And so I held my phone up and I erased all the pictures from them, and then I went outside and I restored all the pictures to them. It's like, really. I went to this most recent book I wrote, which comes out in February. So it's the 3rd book in the city site. It's right now it's just this. Yeah. Right. It's set in Moscow and Beijing. It's funny, Moscow. And it's the first time, because of COVID, especially the expense of going to Moscow, Beijing, I haven't been to the places I'm writing about. So I found people who grew up in Moscow, and I would talk to them and write to them. But my favorite research part of all was for this book. I had a librarian in Virginia write to me that she was a big fan of the books, and their students liked the books, and her husband was a high-ranking member of the Central Intelligence Agency. And so that he was willing to help me, and he's a really high-ranking member, and so he plotted the spy mission with me for the 3rd book, which was great. So I know it's like, it's so realistic. And the second book in the Golden Gate starts in the North Sea on the hijacking of a marine research vessel. And I've never been on one of those. I've been on ships like that, but not like, so I tracked down someone who worked on the RV Sally Ride, which is kind of the biggest American marine research vessel. It's based out of San Diego. Okay. And I said, I just want I want it to be right. I think that's what research is. We're lifelong learners, so it's great to learn new things. But I want to be right. I don't want to give the young readers already bad information at 12 years old. And so she gave me all kinds of stuff. And then I said, now it's going to get into the hokey, you may not like this, but I go, but, if someone ever hijacked the ship, what do you do? Like, what should you do? And she walked me through the procedure, which was great. And then I said, where would you hide? And it was one of my favorite research moments. I go, where would you hide if there are hijackers on board? She goes, oh, I know exactly where to hide. I'm like, you do? She goes, yeah, when we get a new boat, we have to bring it down from like Seattle or wherever it's built, or they have to bring it down, and it's not on a research mission, they're just taking it. And so we play hide and seek and assassin. We play all these games on the boat, because then I know the places and so she gave me like the 2 best places to hide, which I thought was really perfect.
Oh my gosh.
The research is fun, but it's part of it, it's putting off the writing.
Yeah.
I find too, it's amazing how much accidental information you learn from research that just inspires new ideas, not just actualizing what you're writing. And I just made up factualizing, not even like making it accurate, but like, I never even would have thought about do this.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm sure you find this as well. Like, not everything is going to make it into your novel, which is actually really important that you're building the novel rather than just throwing in all of the facts. But I mean, it's all of them are interesting. All of them are so much fun. It's so much fun.
And some, I spent 4 years writing, producing, and directing a series for History Channel about the evolution of how things were made. So I would go to like the oldest guitar company in America and see them hand make guitars, or I'd go into the oldest brewery and all kinds of things. But I went into underground for subways, for salt mining, and for coal mining.
Oh,
Went really deep underground.
yeah.
Not
Terrifying.
realizing I was researching books that I would write years later because of the whole underground world of a series I wrote. And so it's just always great to see these things and get inspired by them.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you get? Why do you like to write mysteries for middle grade versus say adults or young adults? Or is there a reason you're drawn to that?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I've never actually written mysteries for any other audience, to be perfectly honest. But but I am drawn to the middle grade audience, just like time and again. I find every situation I think of, I kind of translate into a middle grade novel. And partly I think that's because middle grade I just love middle grade novels. They're like perfect for, well, mystery, obviously, for adventure, for humor, the kind of humor that like I'm really drawn to. And I find that's one thing for me that's kind of important in mysteries, especially for this age group, is to have some humor. And partly I feel like that's because I'm a person who's like easily scared.
Terrified.
So I won't watch a lot of like really scary mysteries.
Right.
But yeah, to have that like comedic relief is, I think, very important.
One thing I find funny, and I wonder if you deal with this, is so again, especially during COVID, we've been watching so many mysteries. There are so many things that people let slide in adult mysteries, whether they're books or movies or TV shows. Of like, boy, that sure is coincidental that person happened to be married to this person. And I think it's because I think adult readers are willing to let some of that go because they get it. Kids will not let that go. Like I feel like in some ways, because kids don't read a book once. They'll say, "Oh, I read this book 10 times," and it's like, wait, I haven't even read it 10 times. You've read it more, you know it better than I do. So, but it is fun, and I like the idea of teaching. Teaching, it sounds like the wrong way to say it. I like the idea of kids reading a book about kids using analytical skills to solve problems.
Yes, totally.
I think that's kind of preaching to the choir of like, these kids are able to solve these things because kids are smart and adults realize. And in most of the books, that's a situation where the kids are underestimated. I don't try to do the Scooby-Doo thing where all the adults are buffoons and all, but it's like I like my kids to use the underestimatedness of who they are.
Yeah,
now,
absolutely.
Do we have questions? I know we have a question moderator somewhere. I think Matt. Do we have any questions coming our way?
Nothing in the chat. We do have some written ones if are.
There you go.
We had, are the characters in your novels based on people you know?
I'll start with that one. Generally not, although I feel like aspects of people I know always make it into the characters in my novel. Not so much I think that they would know if they read it. I've only had a few characters in my novels that were like very much based on people I knew, and very much from childhood, people who are not in my life anymore. I had, so in this novel that came out in 2018, it's called Clairvoyant, and it's also a bit of a mystery. There's a character in there who is based on, in my elementary school, we had this infamous janitor, and she was the most fierce person I think I have ever met in my life. She was just absolutely formidable. And I've always, she's stayed with me because she was so terrifying. and I needed to write her into one of my novels. So she appears in Clairvoyant, but the rest, not so overt. How about you, James?
And I think maybe when we start writing, like while we're still in school, I think the tendency is to do this where I'm going to fictionalize my brother and change his name a little bit. And that's not a way that I know any writer that writes, and for a number of reasons. But if nothing else, if you based a character off your ex-girlfriend who was awful to you, you would inevitably make that character do horrible things that don't serve the plot because you're taking out your anger of the past, and vice versa. If it's based on your mother, and I don't want to do me. You need to have the freedom of the fiction of the characters being fictional. I find that little traits of people work themselves into things, like and sometimes even in an event. This woman told me out when she was a girl that she was part of this group in middle school, and they had pendants because they were in the group. And one day they voted to kick her out, and they made her give her the pendant. And I thought, this is the meanest thing I've ever heard. And I said, I'd like to use that actual event. But more to the point, I think the thing we lose sight of a lot because we get caught up in the plot and character is books are typically based on problems, solving a problem. And a mystery is a great way to do that in an overt way. But the problems that the characters have are the problems that I had in middle school, or my son had, or my wife. And they're pretty universal. So there's little bits of me in all of them. And usually it's the worst part of each character. Is like, oh, I do that. That's that thing I hate about myself that I do. So you mix it up.
We got one from the chat. It was from Trisha. How do you know it's time to move from research to writing the book? I know we got to go back to that, the research part.
You go ahead, James.
I don't think you ever move from it. I was still doing, like, there are scenes in the book I'm writing now that take place in the Moscow metro, and there's a part of me thinking, do I need to write an email to Rachelle after this because she researched it and say, hey, can you give me a little insight on something? You're always trying to make it better, but that initial spark is you have to remind yourself that, like, so I went to the Edinburgh train station, the Edinburgh airport, and I took pictures everywhere because I like to have the pictures on my computer when I'm writing the scene to remind myself people, crowdedness, colors, weather, whatever, all those sensory things. But at a certain point, it's like, okay, this is just 3 pages. You can't spend 10 days on 3 pages. So you have to always be doing this profit and loss equation in your head. But I think for me, and I'd be interested in Rachelle and I have a totally different viewpoint. I don't start with research because I don't really know what I need to research yet. I start with, I like this and I want to do this and I want to go like right now. I had a new idea for a mystery series set in Miami, and I picked it apart because I can drive down there easily and it's close, but it's also, I know it has a different vibe than any other city in the country, which is one of the things I look for in setting. So I'm writing it. So a friend of mine in Miami, I called and I said, all right, I want to make sure I put them living in the right neighborhood. So I told her a little bit about it. And I just found a little bit about Coconut Grove, which is the area that it would be. But I need to write probably 40 pages to know that, okay, you need to find out X, Y, and Z. And then I'll stop writing and I'll go research whether it's in person, online, a combination of both. So I think when you realize you can write the chapter and you're not having any questions, right? You have information coming into it. It's a very unofficial way to do it, but I think that's kind of the vibe.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's a great explanation. I also do research throughout and often keep doing research even when the book is done, which can drive me a little bit crazy as well. Yeah, I agree. It's the research is almost never done. I do do find, like, because as I said, I do really detailed outlines and I spend a lot of time outlining. I just eventually reach a point where I can't put off the writing any longer. And it's just kind of a feeling that comes to me. It's usually after like a couple months of doing my outlines, and I finally get some sense of security, I guess, that I know what the story is, that I have at least enough research to go on. Even if there's a lot of gaps in my knowledge, still there's always going to be gaps in my knowledge. Yeah, I get this feeling like, okay, it's time to face the writing.
And how long is the process for you to write a book typically? Is there a set, have they been so different? And you've done it 8 times now, so there's got to be some things that have built into a rhythm and a pattern and okay, I know what this is.
Yeah, good question. I would say for me, it takes about 6 months to write a draft of a novel. Generally, I do have a full-time job, so I usually write about 3 days a week.
And does that 6 months include 2 months of research, or is that after the 2 months?
No, that's actually after the research. So yeah, I mean, I would say I do like a solid 6 months of kind of planning and researching before I start to write. And then, like, on average, I would say it takes me about 6 months to write a draft. And then I'll do maybe another 6 months on average of like rewriting and editing before I will send it to my agent or my editor. How about you? What's that like?
I have written the first 7 books I wrote with a full-time job, so the same way. So I write on weekends or at night.
Yeah.
It would take usually 9 months to write a book. I would think 9 to 10 months to write a book. But it was a book a year. I'm trying to move into 2 books a year now that I'm writing full time. I started in August. Just I finished after 20 plus years of television. And, I really just want to do books from now on.
Cool.
And so I'm hoping I can do that turnaround in 6 months. It's a little bit different for me though. Is that so far at least I've exclusively written series. And series writing is, you spend more time in the first one because you're building the world of the series, but then the other ones take less research because you're not researching everything. You're researching the specific needs of that plot. And so it gets a little bit faster. And probably gets to be like 7 months, 6 months. And but I think this gets lost a lot of times if you haven't. I certainly didn't know coming in because I had not planned on being an author ever in my life, until I was one. It's not a thing that you do nonstop. You write this and then you have to go finish this, and then you submit this, and you have to wait, and they want and it goes. And so rare is the time you start a book and then don't do anything else until you finish the book. And then there's the editors, and editors get left out of the thought process a lot by people outside, but they play a really important role. And especially for me, writing a mystery, I rely so much on an editor for being able to tell me, okay, you didn't give me enough clues for this. You gave me 2, because it's so in your head that you begin to worry, I'm telegraphing everything, and you make it too obscure, right? And finding that balance, you need that outside eye to look in and kind of keep you true.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be lost without my editor for sure.
Have you had the same editor for multiple?
Yeah, I've actually had the same editor for every single one of my books.
That's great. Great.
It's wonderful. We have a great working relationship, and I worry for when she's not nearing retirement, but I worry for that day.
I worry that stuff all the time. I always worry about my agent retiring and my editor retiring. It's like they have too many other successful clients and writers that I'm like, don't make too much money that you don't have to keep doing this, because I need you to keep doing this.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
We have another question, or?
Let's see here. I just want to give everybody a warning. We got 7 more minutes. One of the questions we had here was, are there any topics you feel should be off limits when writing a mystery for middle school audience?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a question I don't know, like that. Yes, I think that we need to be cognizant of our readers' place in life. So I think our readers can handle much more than most people think. And that's just not content, that's complexity, for example. My stories have complex plots, but as long as you lay them out fair, the kids follow them, and it's great. And kids are aware of the world and dangers and threats of the world far more than we want to accept, or think, especially if we're parents and you're raising your kids. So I think a lot of things are in play, but I have comfort levels of what I want to write about with kids, and for me, most of those tend to be on what I'm willing to let the kids in my stories do. Like, I don't have guns in my stories. I know kids know what guns are. And then people will say, well, gee, in this one, you had them literally defuse a nuclear weapon. And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay with them dealing with nuclear weapons because I know that kid's not going to find a nuclear weapon in the garage or something like that. So I don't do too much of that, but I do watch that. And I know that the younger end of who read my books is such that violence and drugs and sexual content is not something I really write about, but really tough issues of the day I would happily write about. I don't know, what do you think on that?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked this question before. It's good for me to actually think about and try to put words to. I feel similar. I think that it's pretty rare that guns even feature in my novels. And like I said before, like I am an easily scared person. So I think because of that, like I naturally have kind of boundaries around like how violent, how scary, how traumatizing that I want things to be. So that's kind of what I give my readers as well. I mean, I think that if you as the author feel a certain way about something, then at least some of your readers are going to feel the same way as well. So yeah, for me personally, not a ton of violence. I mean, in my latest novel, there's like they learn a Victorian martial art. So it's that kind of like using your skills kind of, I guess, violence. But I guess it's more, I feel like I'm kind of blathering right now, but there's something around empowering kids. So maybe that's kind of has to do with what you were talking about with kids like diffusing a bomb.
And I've actually had this conversation with my editor at the time. And when I worked at Nickelodeon and when I worked at Disney Channel, there were hard and fast rules of what we're allowed and not allowed to do on television. And sometimes that was crippling from a story standpoint. I used to write a show called The Mickey Mouse Club. That was a sketch comedy show. And it's like, you can't make fun of teachers. You can't make fun of parents. You can't make fun of kids. And I remember once saying in a meeting, I go, we write a sketch comedy show for 8-year-olds. And if we can't make fun of home, school, or the world, we've really eliminated their frame of references. So we have to find ways around that, right? But for me, the scope, I also worked on a show called Superboy, and DC Comics had rules of what Superboy could do versus what Superman could do. And they were very hard and fast rules.
Interesting.
So I had a talk with an editor once about the second book. I said, the first book in the series is whatever it is. The second book sets the pattern. So if the first book is a theft, if the second book is an art theft, then you're writing an art theft series. You don't then have the second book be kidnapping, right? So it's kind of like the second book has to be the other edge of the plot to me. And so it was a very long discussion about what it could be. And I said, like, I don't think they would probably investigate a murder. And then we talked about, they could. We would not want to show a violent murder, but they could. And in the end, it came down to the only thing that was forbidden in the book was the mention of evolution. And I'm like, what? And they go, there's just too many areas that we don't want to deal with librarians getting in trouble for having a book that talks about evolution And I said, I want to get this straight. They could kill, we could kill someone. We just can't talk about dinosaurs. Is that what you're telling me?
Wow.
I said pretty much. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to feel like, is this just something I want to write about? Is this something that I want to share with kids? And whatever it is, we have to be honest about it. Because also on the flip side is I don't write about guns. I don't have guns necessarily, although there's some mentioned, there's some, but I can't have a world where we have terrorists with lassos either. You know, so it's like if I'm going to have bad guys, I have to be true to, well, the threat of bad guys, because, you know, it is tricky. All right, this is going to shut off in 1 minute. Rachelle, it has been lovely to get to discuss this.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you all of you who come to join us today.
Hopefully we'll see you in other sessions as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
This was great. This was great.
All right.
You guys have a wonderful day.
Have a great day.
You.